Again, good afternoon, dear participants. It's my pleasure to welcome you all here to the second session of the PUP on PAM thesis seminar. So I am Sam and I will be your host for today's webinar. So in this webinar, you will continue to witness the presentation of the thesis paper of the student interns from the Polytechnic University of the Philippines. But before we start our program, I would just like to give a few reminders to our dear participants. For the smooth flow of this program, microphones shall be muted unless asked otherwise. There will be an open forum after the presentation, so please feel free to utilize the chat box to ask your questions, concerns, and even reactions. I'm also encouraging our participants to utilize Zoom's React function, and the same goes with our YouTube live viewers. Do not hesitate to click like, clap, heart, and other emojis if you like. Okay, now it seems like we are ready to start and excited to hear the thesis presentation for today. Again, let me reiterate that there would be an open forum after the presentation. So I am encouraging everyone to share your inquiries and curiosities in our chat box. So without further ado, let me introduce to you our dear speakers for today's event. So the presenters for today are comprised of 3 people. Kathleen Arcay, who leads this group of researchers, is a candidate for graduation this year and with the highest honor. She is currently undergoing an internship at Universitas Pamulang under Ibu Tutik Ratna Ningtyas guidance, as well as Cambridge University Press and Assessment as a communications intern. The second researcher, Sophia Lorraine Pagliawan, is also a candidate for graduation this year and with the highest honor. She is currently undergoing an internship at Universitas Pamulang under Ibu Kansas guidance. And finally, Erica Rose Geronimo is the third researcher and is a candidate for graduation this year and as well, running for high honors. She is undergoing an internship at Universitas Pamulang under Pak Amirudin's guidance. All 3 are working on publishing their thesis with their co-author, Associate Prof. Jose V. Clotario. Let's give them a virtual round of applause.
Should I start now?
Yes.
Okay, so good afternoon, everyone. My warmest welcome for attending today. I would like to express my gratitude that despite your busy schedules, you still took your precious time to listen to us talk about our theses. My name is Kathleen Arcay, and I am the leader of this group. And these are my group mates that I'm most proud of: Miss Sophia Lorraine Pagliawan.
Hello, everyone. Hi.
And Miss Erica Rose Geronimo.
Hi, good afternoon.
Okay, so I will be starting the talk with our introduction. Please present our screen. I think we've shared it to the moderators. Please present our slides. Sorry. Okay, today we will be presenting to you our study, the Child Your Sus, the use of AAVE by non-African American Twitter users. Next, please. Yep, next. You can flash until the introduction, please. Next. Next. There. Thank you. So, I don't know if you're familiar with this, but this is a game that had been viral since 2018, I think, and especially after the pandemic, because it kind of brings strangers together to have them find out who the enemy is, or kind of like the killer in this particular regard. So what you might ask yourself, what exactly brought us to be interested in this particular research? So I am an avid consumer of media and Twitter, and I know that most people know how Twitter works, but I meet different nationalities there, like friends from different nationalities. But last year, I found out that from an informative Twitter thread that my use of the word child was wrong. So next, please. Please play the video.
I hate doing shit and not perfecting it. Can you guys hear me good? Big boobs. What? Child. Anyway, so
Okay, so that was a very small clip of what started this whole thing about child. So in the video, child is used by Nicki Minaj after someone like comments something irrelevant to the topic that she's talking about. So it's not related to the conversation. So she's like, child. Okay, anyway, so it's a way for the language to get redirected back to the actual conversation. So my wrong use was a real shock for me because I don't encourage anyone to disrespect other people's culture. So when I researched about it, I found out that it was still being debated and linguistically. So if the use of someone else's vernacular or language, so this is an appropriative act. Because it's a symbol of their culture. So whether or not the use of this particular word or phrase would be adaptation or appropriation. Of course, there were studies that focus on AV in general being adapted as part of one's linguistic repertoire or linguistic identity, such as um, uh, Lee or Igodin. But there's also studies that talk about AV being appropriated from its rightful users. Now that it's something that I know is already ongoing in academic discussions, I told my plan to study this with my friends, Miss Pagliawan and Miss Geronimo. And they got interested in it as well. So that's where the word sus comes in. So they're also players of the game Among Us. Can you back up the presentation, please? Yeah, that game, so it was really crazy back then. It was viral, that's the word. So you're gonna say the word sus in every sentence you have back then. So you're doing laundry when you're lazy, that's kind of sus. So you're doing something you don't usually do, that's also sus. So next, please. Next. Next. So that was the beginning of this entire study, and that's what exactly made us feel um, closer to the topic at hand. So and became it let us become invested in it because we were also interested in it. So what exactly is African American Vernacular English? So it was first referred to as Ebonics, Black English Vernacular, or basically just Black English, which the terms are interchangeable. But later, the linguists refer to it as African American English, according to Bo in 2020. It was a Creole that was used in the colonial era after the African population was taken from their country and enslaved by Americans. So there's a kind of a dark history around the word. That's why there's still debate if this particular use is appropriative or if it's adaptative. So is it all right to use this even though there's like a dark history behind the treatment of Black or African American people? So usually, this kind of way of talking is taken by Americans to show in the movies so that they can act cool or perform their stereotypes of their speech to entertain in the film, which is kind of not appropriate, basically, if you're looking to it from a perspective of an African American. However, we should also consider that African Americans are part of the minority, like Asians in the U.S. and most Asian countries in was also colonized, just like Latin America. So if Lee and Igodin in 2011 and 2013 precisely found out that in their study that speaking of sometimes also is a way for minority like Asians or Latin Americans who are part of minority is a way for them to represent themselves because their speech is different from actual Americans. So now, next please. Now, our question is, what exactly is it about certain people that make it so that they're used to appropriate or adapt it as part of their linguistic identities is facilitated? So if we can understand the factors, just like we have here, the third one, the factors that differentiate linguistic adaptation from language appropriations, we can on a platform that acts as an interactional hotspot of culture and extension with contacts from each other's linguistic repertoire, then we can maybe alter our approach and take a controlled effort to give the vernacular respect or guide how we must act against it. So the first question we have is, how do non-African Americans use terms in Twitter to situate ourselves? And then which instances of the use of child and sus by non-African Americans can be considered as language appropriation and linguistic adaptation? Finally, to find out about the second question, we ask what factors actually differentiate language appropriation from linguistic adaptation. So this was the theory we've applied.
However, in order for us to be able to properly investigate the questions that we have posted, we needed to have an appropriate approach as well as unbiased theories that serve as the basis for the study. Next slide, please. For this, we utilize Potter and Wetherell's 1987 discourse analysis approach, which is the study of social activity in the linguistic lens and its extended forms, whether it be in discourse or culture. For our study, we applied their approach of having two phases. The first phase is the search for patterns, and the next phase is forming hypotheses according to these patterns. So upon forming the hypotheses, we needed to have theories that we can use as a basis to prove or disprove the said hypothesis that we came up with. Thus, in order to have an unbiased study, we decided to have two theories. The first one is Verschweren's 1999 linguistic adaptation theory, and the second one is Rogers' 2006 four categories of cultural appropriation. Next, please. So we will first discuss Verschweren's theory. So according to his theory, he defines linguistic adaptability as the property of language which enables human beings to make negotiable linguistic choices from a variable range of possibilities. This is in order to satisfy communicative needs. His theory also talks about how an utterance, whether it be written or oral, will not have a meaning of itself outside the linguistic context. He maintains that any part of a communicative event is a contextual correlate of adaptation. So based on his theory, we instantly presume that the data that we have is adaptation. Furthermore, Verschweren also proposed a framework to further identify adaptation from three concepts. We have the mental world, the social world, and the physical world, which we will expound more. So first is the mental world. This involves the personality, emotions, beliefs, desires, wishes, motivations, and intentions of the people involved in the communication, whether they be the utterer or the interpreter. The next one is the social world. This involves social settings or institutions, as well as community-specific communicative norms. And finally, we have the physical world, which involves temporal and spatial deixis, as well as nonverbal cues. This concept is not that significant for this study, but it was still referred to when it comes to the spatial deixis of the data, as will be discussed later on. So now that we have tackled Schrodinger's theory, we will now go to Rogers' theory, the other theory that we decided to use. Rogers defined cultural appropriation as the use of a culture's symbols, artifacts, genres, rituals, or technologies by members of another culture. For him, any instance in which a group borrows or imitates the strategies of another, even if they did not mean to deconstruct or distort the meaning, that would still be considered appropriation. Um, Despite language not being explicitly stated in Rogers' definition of appropriation, he still regards it to be part of culture, as mentioned in his discussion of the categories. Furthermore, Rogers reinforces that language is not a static system. It only gains force, thus becoming appropriation if the context of which it is used is broken. Okay, so aside from defining appropriation, Rogers classified it into four categories. We have cultural exchange, cultural dominance, cultural exploitation, and transculturation. So before we move on to the discussion of the individual categories, I will first introduce the concept of having a dominant and a subordinate culture. So I will be mentioning it quite a lot in the next few paragraphs, in the next few instances. So dominant culture is how do we decide what the dominant is from the subordinate culture? So basically, we decided upon it based on history. So if, for example, a culture colonized African Americans, that will be considered as the dominant culture to the African Americans. Those that were colonized by African Americans, that will be considered as the subordinate culture. So it's kind of a political power and based on history. So now that we have introduced what the power relations are, we will go on to discuss the individual categories. First one is the cultural exchange. This is the reciprocal exchange of symbols, artifacts, rituals, genres, or technologies between cultures with roughly equal levels of power. So that's the keyword here, roughly equal levels of power and reciprocal exchange. Next, we have cultural dominance. This is the use of elements from a dominant culture by a subordinate culture. Such use is imposed on the subordinate culture through the power that the dominant culture has. So in cultural dominance, the culture that is being used is from the dominant culture. Next, we have cultural exploitation. This is the use of elements of a subordinate culture by a dominant culture. The dominant culture establishes its dominance over the subordinate one with the use of their own elements. So the cultural elements comes from the subordinate culture and is being used by the dominant culture. Finally, we have the last category, which is transculturation. This category is made up of elements created from and by multiple cultures through appropriation, wherein it would be problematic to identify a single originating culture. Next slide, please. So after deciding on the appropriate approach and theories for this research, the next step is to apply the theories that we have decided on. For that, we have our conceptual framework, as you can see on the screen, which is the process of how we did our study. So the first boxes at the top, those are sus and child. They are the dependent variables that are included in the tweets that we are looking for, that we got. They were interpreted using two theories, Rogers for categories of cultural appropriation, and then Verschuren's linguistic adaptation theory. Any tweets containing the words sus and child that fall under any of Rogers' categories will be considered as language appropriation. Meanwhile, those that either fall under Verschuren's theory or do not explicitly fall under any of Rogers' categories, they will be considered as linguistic adaptation. You can notice that you may notice that the lines leading up and connecting physical world is perforated. This is because that domain is less influential for the study of the tweets. It was still referred to when it comes to spatial bases such as the COVID-19 pandemic and pop culture, but it is not as significant as the social and mental worlds. We will now be proceeding to the scope and limitations of this study.
Again, good afternoons. As we all know that the study of AAVE is so broad that if we do not put any limitations, we might get lost. So here, on the next slide, please. Thank you. So we present to you the scope and limitations of our study. So we as researchers are also consumers of social media, especially the Twitter platform. And that is one of the reasons why we decided to use it as a place to gather our data. So the Twitter community has various users all over the world. So there are a lot of interactions that can happen between different nationalities. And through these interactions, the culture and language are being shared. And I know this is TMI, but that is also the place where we learn what app is. So why did we choose sus and child? So there are a lot of app words out there. So, but these two terms piqued our curiosity. Sus was popularized by a game called Among Us, just like what Ms. Kathleen mentioned. As we dig deeper on the region of this word, we found out that it was used in Great Britain as sus law. So it is called the Vagrancy Act of 1824, and this is a law where the Black community severely suffered, as it was mostly a targeted operation that involved race. So, however, Paes, who archived the term sus, asserted that this word was reclaimed by Black communities and internet forums and social media platforms. Thus, it has a really rich history that originally came from the English, but had been reclaimed and was acknowledged as part of the AAVE lexicon. So on the other hand, we have Child. So Child was popularized by Nicki Minaj. So during her Instagram live, just like what we have watched earlier, she's someone, a fan, viewer commented big boobs, which was so unrelated to their topic. So then Nicki Minaj then replied, big boobs, Child, anyways. So uh, she said this to redirect the topic about the sexist comment and turn it back to its original flow. So this particular occasion was viewed as a funny situation, but it also showed how celebrities influence their followers in terms of what they do and what they say. Because since then it became internet meme, and this is also an instance in how it became celebrated in popular culture. So Sus and Child made us think that it can be a good starting point of our study due to its really rich history and its relevance in the internet communities now. And because there are also limited studies about this. So in the next slide, yeah, whose tweets are suitable for this study. So we believe that we decided that as long as the owners of the tweets are non-Africans, African Americans, they are suitable for our study. So their sex and gender do not really matter, don't matter at all, as they are not as long as they are non-African Americans. So this is to sustain the purpose of our study. We also excluded the biracial people that have African American descent. So we tried looking at their cards to identify their nationalities. Now you may ask, what is card? So this can be seen in the Twitter platform. So this platform where people put their basic personal information about themselves, and we also try to see their display pictures, their tweets, bios, which may indicate their race explicitly. In the next slide. Okay, thanks. Thank you. So there are a lot of things that we consider on gathering data. So we kept in mind to get their consent, particularly when the Twitter user of a tweet is categorized as ambiguous. And they are considered ambiguous when we already look everywhere for their nationalities or anything that explicitly state their nationalities or declare explicit declaration. There are no explicit declarations of it anywhere in their account. So we call them ambiguous. So if they do not put, or if they do not reply or have chosen not to participate in our study, then we will respect their decision. And if they reply with their nationality to our direct message, only then we can remove them from the ambiguous area and then turn it into an actual data file. So in addition, we only included the data from those who have responded with their nationalities that perfectly fit our criteria. So the data from those who did not respond were not used. So next slide. We're moving on to the time frame. So because the COVID-19 pandemic began in March 2020, we decided to start gathering our data from March 2020 until March 2021. So when the lockdown policies started to get significantly lost. So the period of, and we also included all the tweets from the results of the advanced Twitter search engine that was displayed by Twitter. So we decided to focus on the COVID-19 lockdown period because internet usage because the use of internet at that time increases due to it being one of the only ways to connect with the people with other people while they are quarantined. The next slide. Okay, now we're moving on to the significance of the study. So who will benefit from this study? As we all know, first is the academic. And this study makes a significant contribution to social linguistics because language appropriation and linguistic adaptation are not well studied topic in the field. So and next are the researchers. This study will function as a springboard for future researches. And then also the English majors because learning languages, especially taught us that it is not enough to simply learn how to speak or use the language, but we must also understand and appreciate the culture behind it, as well as the experiences of the people from whom the language originated, in order to use their language more effectively and not in an exploitative manner. So this study can also be used by English majors as this is a source of information for language appropriation or linguistic adaptation. So in the next slide, the main beneficiaries of these research findings are the netizens, since they are those who utilize the internet and social media the most. It also helps them to improve themselves and their attitude towards African Americans. So this research will also benefit the African Americans by teaching people not only how to respect their culture, but also by raising awareness about their history. And last but not the least is the society, because it aims to educate everyone on how to use African American vernacular English.
So we will now move on to how exactly we conducted our research. So we conducted this study using the descriptive research design, which according to Manuel and Medel 1976, describes and interprets phenomenon. It is a study of how a person, group, or thing functions in a particular focus. This is appropriate for our research because we aim to provide a description of how the AAVE words challenged us are used by non-African Americans. Our data is considered preliminary because it mapped out the use of AAVE only during the lockdown period of the COVID-19 pandemic. For this study, we explored the factors that differentiate language appropriation from linguistic adaptation by listing the usage of AAVE in Twitter and describing the factors that arise while determining which one of the two it is. We also utilized Twitter's advanced search engine for the data gathering and Potter and Wetherell's 1987 discourse analysis approach for the data analysis process. For the sources of data, our primary source is Twitter, which is a microblogging social platform that allows users to post short messages shared with an online audience. These messages are called tweets, and they only have a 280 character limit. People use Twitter for a variety of reasons, maybe for recreation, as a marketing tool, or for instant messaging. For the data gathering procedure, we prepped for it first before we actually went on to gather our data. We prepped for it by creating Google Mail, Twitter, and card accounts dedicated for this study. Next slide, please. Yeah, you can play the video once. Yes, thank you. So Card is, as mentioned earlier, is a website builder often used by people to make websites about themselves or to share information about anything they like to talk about, whether it be an advocacy or a campaign that they want to promote. Our Google Mail account was used to create our Twitter account and also to access our Google Drive folders where we kept our data. Card was used to give information about the study, and Twitter was used to collect data and contact respondents that have ambiguous profiles. So after this whole preparation stage, we started with the actual data gathering process, which has 3 phases. So the first phase, we connected to Twitter and used its advanced search engine so that we can get our target tweets. The advanced search engine offers filters for words, accounts, replies, links, engagement, language, and dates. However, we only used the filter to determine the words, language, and the dates. For this initial phase, next slide, please. Next slide. The next one. Yeah, okay. You can play the video. For this initial phase, Twitter gave us English tweets posted from March 1, 2020 to March 31, 2021 that included either child or sus. So as you can see in the video, that is how exactly we gathered our data. We used the advanced search engine. The tweets, March, yes. So for the second phase of the data gathering process, this involved filtering the data from phase one. In this phase, we filtered out those tweets that did not use child or sus as AAVE. This includes tweets that use child to pertain to the country Chile, or use sus as the short form of the name Suzanne, or even as the Filipino expression sus. Okay. So let's go back to the slides, please. Thank you. Next one. Okay, so the third and final phase of the data gathering process is determining the validity of data by making sure that we're only using tweets posted by non-African Americans. The race was determined using their public Twitter profiles, photographs, location, biographies, explicit assertions of race, and their cards. May I ask everyone to please mute their mics? Thank you. So as I've said, the third and final phase of the data gathering process involves filtering out those that are non-African American. So we had to make sure that the tweets that we're including are only made by non-African American people. So any user that had an ambiguous nationality, we messaged them directly to ask for their information and to also for their permission to be included in our study. Identity fraud is not a concern because it is rare for people to identify as a nationality or race that they are not. Anyone who does so is quickly exposed by their following, especially if they use AAVE. So once those with ambiguous nationalities replied with the information that fit the criteria for our study, then their tweets were included in our data. Otherwise, we exclude them. So this data gathering process was conducted from June 1 to June 15, 2021. And the time frame for the actual data was from March 1, 2020 to March 31, 2021 to include the months of lockdowns worldwide due to the pandemic. Next slide, please. So now we move on to the analysis of our data. After gathering and getting all of the tweets, we analyzed them through the use of the discourse analysis approach by Potter and Wetherell 1987. We deemed their approach to be appropriate because it focuses on the social aspects of communication and culture as a topic of social discussion. Potter and Wetherell also mentioned two phases when it comes to the analysis of data which we followed. The first phase is searching for patterns in the data, which has three concepts: variability, consistency, and function. For the second phase of this analysis, it is the forming of the hypotheses about how about the function and effects that we saw in phase one. This was applied in the study by forming hypotheses about how the word child and sus were used and why it was identified as linguistic adaptation or language appropriation in accordance with our theories. So after segregating the tweets into their appropriate language uses, we viewed the data through the lenses of Rogers and Verschoren's theories. So we mentioned them earlier for our theoretical framework. For Rogers' theory, we looked at the nationality and race of the user as well as the history of the keywords involved. Are they from a race that is considered dominant, subordinate, or equal to the African Americans? If they are equals, this is considered cultural exchange as long as there is reciprocation happening. If the user belongs to a race that is subordinate to the African Americans, this could be considered as cultural dominance. Finally, if the user is part of a race that is dominant to the African Americans, then it would be considered as cultural exploitation, but only if the said user established the dominance of their own culture in using AAVE. However, if the element is questioned, such as sus, is a result of multiple cultures appropriating and using that element throughout the years, then it is considered transculturation, no matter the power relations between the cultures involved. This is valid because Rogers privileges transculturation, emphasizing that while it is still related to the other categories, it is subject to different situations that make it transculturation. So as for Verschuren's theory, the data is already presumed to be adaptation. Thus, each language use is further observed under his theory to determine what their primary concept is. Is it the mental world or the social world? For this, we looked at the context of the tweets and figured out which concept is more influential. If the personality, emotions, beliefs, motivations, and intentions of the users influence the tweet more, then that the primary concept of that tweet will be mental world. Otherwise, if the social setting is more influential, then the primary concept is social world. Why is this important? This helped us in determining whether the use of AAVE by non-African Americans is language appropriation or linguistic adaptation. This is because Verschuren's concepts provided additional aid for context. There are instances wherein the words were not used as they were intended to be due to the influence of their community, social world. Thus, it would be considered adaptation. There were also instances wherein the users had the intention of mocking AV and the African American culture in general, which makes it a form of appropriation. So that intention is under the mental world. So for the ethical considerations, there isn't really a violation, or we did not seek the need to ask the users individually for each tweet of their permission to include their tweets in our study. This is because Twitter is a public domain. Tweets of public accounts are also considered to be public because Twitter users have the option to make their profiles private. So furthermore, Twitter's privacy policy allows for the use of their users' tweets as long as it does not contain any private information about the people. So as we have mentioned earlier, for those users with unclear or ambiguous nationalities, we message them directly and then ask for their information as well as their permission to participate in our study. We excluded the tweets of those users that failed to respond or have declined our inquiry. So we now move on to the results of our study.
And now we're moving on to the results of the study, of our study. So the data that were gathered and analyzed is a total of 1,319. So as we are carefully adhering to the discourse analysis framework by Potter and Weatherill, it is really important to categorize the tweets in different contexts. We discovered that categorizing tweets according to their context is quite convenient. And here are the 5 different contexts: the personal, social, gaming, sports and entertainment, and political. After categorizing the tweets according to their context, we analyze the tweets by classifying how they use the language. According to our study, there are 9 different language uses of sus that are shown in the results. As you can see there, as sus was used as an adjective, as a verb, and so on and so forth, as you can see there. In the next slide, we also have child. So there are 6 different language use of child. As you can see there, there are as child pertaining to another person or general audience, as an interjection or to refer the word itself. So that is what we've gathered and analyzed. Okay, so let's go back to the previous slides. So the findings of the data, all use of sus is transculturation. So based on Rogers' 4 categories of cultural appropriation, as the cultural elements were created from and or by multiple cultures, and to the reason that the word sus is a product of different cultures because of its history. Under Verschuren's linguistic adaptation theory, we put the mental world as the primary world. Primary world on the use of sus is an adjective to refer to the word itself and is upon as a joke. There, where it functions because the Twitter user that utilized the word sus was aware of its real meaning, while the use of sus that primarily functions in the social world, as you can see there, are the following. So this is the use of sus as a verb, as a sister, as a gay, as suspended, as way of greeting as it is used in among us. So they are classified as social world because it has a community-specific use that is widely accepted within a certain community. So regardless of the fact that the language they employ does not correspond to the actual meaning of the word or how it was originally used. So on the next slide, we're going to tackle the child. So the language use of child are all primarily functioning in the mental world, aside from the tweets that use child as chill, which is functioning in the social world because it has a community specific meaning that a member of the community um, that uses it as chill. It thinks that the actual meaning of the word chill, chill that thinks that it is the actual meaning of the word. So it is also indicated that tweets that utilize child as interjection, as chill, as an internet phrase or is categorized as general appropriation, as you can see there, which is not explicitly included in Rogers' theory, but Rogers welcomed the use of other models and types of appropriation. So this is due to the fact, so this is due to their use of child, not warranting transculturation as the roots of the word they use are specific, but they don't really use child with the thought of disrespecting it, or rather they saw it used in the community and they celebrated it by using it as part of their intellect. So on the next slide, there are also some instances of data that are classified as cultural appropriation. So this is based on Rogers' theory because a tweet was made by a person of dominant culture, just like what Sophia explained earlier about the dominant culture to the African Americans, which are the European Americans. So in order to mock or disrespect the African Americans, so some tweets were discovered to be overusing AV and adamantly refusing to acknowledge that AV words should be credited for their lexicon. So these tweets function in the mental world, even though it showed some cultural exploitation because their use of child is correct, but they openly showed their intention to mock or disrespect African Americans on their own accord. So in extension, showing their personality and part of their own belief to use app not to appreciate but to exploit. Now we are moving on to some examples on the next slide. Ayan, sample data. Ayan. Sample tweets that we gathered and analyzed. So the sample tweet on the left side of our presentation uses a child as an interjection or expression of emotion. It is also an example of general appropriation and functions in the mental world due to the choice of the people to use it as to express their emotions. So the second picture of a tweet that uses sus as an adjective, used in a with black background falls under transculturation based on Rogers' four categories of cultural appropriation. While the third sample shows that the use of child is an internet meme or phrase, it is considered as cultural exploitation due to the overusage of app words, which is an action that is explicitly considered by African Americans to be disrespectful or mocking them and their culture. And now we are moving on to our conclusion.
Okay, now moving on to our conclusions for this study, we found out that there were 9 total usage of sus, as Erica said. It's not just sus as an adjective. Likewise, there are a total of 6 uses of the word child, and it's not just child. So, but all of these are in fact, as we've said in the results or as reflected by our results, is an instance of linguistic adaptation. So rather than judge one language use as a general instance of appropriation, we actually had a really productive research in the fact that we found out factors that determine whether or not someone's single, not as a whole, but single language use of the words or linguistic appropriation or language appropriation. So what we found and what is really important in our research is that we know now how to identify someone's single use as an instance of linguistic or language appropriation. So these factors found based on the results were number one, hostility, number two, intention, number three, overusage, and number four, misconstrued use. Finally, we have refusal to acknowledge the origin. Apart from that, there are also some few interesting conclusions we found in the study. First, we found out a direct correlation with the frequency of use, depending on the viral topics discussed in the platform at the moment. For example, child was more used on the early days after, like before the Black Lives Matter movement. I don't know if you've heard of that, but I hope you did. So Black Lives Matter movement is a movement that came to be after George Floyd's case. Correct me if I'm wrong, but I think I'm right. So sus wasn't used as is in the early days, but now it's accepted as a constant part of people's social act after the game Among Us became viral around August of 2020 and until now. So we found another category of appropriation, which is Rogers encourages people to create other categories of appropriation to be used in his actual theory. So we applied this and we proposed general appropriation as a term we derived from the definition provided by Rogers himself. It is the kind of appropriation where one uses a linguistic property of the culture without the intent to exploit it. So it cannot be categorized as cultural exploitation, but it is a sure product of another culture's language. Thus, it cannot be categorized as transculturation because it celebrates this linguistic property. Now, let's conclude linguistic adaptation. So language is not static. This is a fact that is supported by both theorists and Rogers and Verstrehren. Language will only be appropriated when the original function of it is broken by applying force that we mentioned earlier. Verstrehren, meanwhile, he agrees that any communicative event is a contextual correlate of adaptation. Thinking about this, there is no general instance of language appropriation. Language, in its sense, will always change, and that's how it adapted to the evolution of the human society itself. We have new words that were once part of another culture, but now we use it in something else, so to represent something as efficiently as possible. These words, despite being adopted, must still be appreciated and celebrated as part of another's linguistic repertoire and a symbol of their culture that we adapted to celebrate it and eternalize it. That is the beauty of language. Finally, next please. Next please. Okay, so this is what I've said earlier. So next, please. Okay, so our recommendations, even though we are proud of how productive this study is, we don't want to regard this study as an endpoint of this academic discussion. We are simply adding to the existing body of knowledge that we want to be considered as part of because of the time we invested in this particular field. So we would be most interested in reading more physical properties of speech, basically one that doesn't just focus on the internet, because as you can see, our study is focusing on that. So we only focused on 2 words as well. So we want to read more possible results for other words. And there's also a promising research that focuses on specific nationalities to find out if there's nationalities that appropriate language more often than others, and if so, why? And finally, a proud development of our study is it inspired our co-author, Sir Jose Clotario, an already excellent academic, to possibly adopt our methodology in order to study AAVE in terms of double indexicality. So we're all so proud that this research brought attention for international studies of AAVE in different perspectives, as this just takes us a step further in appreciating how language works in different cultures and how important our field is in the ever-evolving body of language. So for me, Kathleen Arcay from Sophia Pagliawan, and Erica Rose, thank you very much for listening today. That's all po. Next. You can just flash this, just next. Thank you.
Okay, let us shower our speakers with some love by clicking the applause or heart reactions. Thank you, dear speakers, for that comprehensive and wonderful discussion. And also congratulations and thank you again for sharing your study with us. And now it's time for our open forum. So may I call on our moderator, Janella.
Okay, so hello, good afternoon, everyone. And again, I would like to give gratitude to our presenters for presenting us your paper for today's event. So now we are opening the comment section for your questions to our presenters. We already have a few questions in the comment box. Let me read the first one. A question from YouTube. So the question is, oh, it's a lengthy one. Okay, AV terms are prevalent on social media platforms in today's digital culture. In a case study, Blodgett, Green, and O'Connor show that some genuine phonological phenomena, including a number of AAE features, are accurately reflected in orthographic variations on social media. Some of these orthographic variations include substituting shoal for sure, ion for I don't, talking about for talking about, and some for something. So in addition, the study mentions common syntactic constructions of AV, such as habitual be, future gone, and completive done. So the question is this phenomena produced from linguistic inability of AV to attain the standard English? And is there any approach other than culture appropriation due to the spread of rap music by AV?
So let's first tackle the first one. Also an interesting connotation. Is this phenomena produced from a linguistic inability of AV to attain the standard of English? Let's first talk about what we think standard English is. Honestly, as the researchers, as well as I guess our peers, probably do not think highly of prestige about this standard English. I do not personally, and according to the studies that we've seen, believe that there should be something we call standard in English, because I think that even all the Englishes that we have, like African American Vernacular English, Philippine English, Indonesian English that people in UNPAM speak, I don't think it's our inability to attain the standard English. I think it's just a product of how we pronounce words depending on the culture that we are in. For example, in the Philippines, we don't usually say words as rounded as it is said in English. For example, what we usually said for perfect is actually just perfect. So that's not us with our inability to attain the standard English. It is actually our cultures that reflecting on us. And I think it's the same for African American Vernacular English. They're not necessarily trying to become the standard English. They're just speaking the English that works best for them according to their culture. So thank you very much for that question. Does my group mates want to add anything else for the first question? Sure, Pia. Let's go.
Yeah, so for the first question, I just want to add something that I share the same sentiments as Kathleen, but I would like to provide some other factors that might that answer the question. So it is not, as she said, it is not we do not want to reach standard English. We want to claim our own version of English, to make our own variety of English, the term. So why do we have those kinds of for example, substitutions? This is actually influenced by our mother tongue. So the Philippines, Filipino is mostly P's and B's and not really F's, right? So when it comes to Philippine English, we substitute F for P because that is what that is the Filipino influence on us, on our use of English. So we can think similarly when it comes to AV for this one. Yeah. Thank you.
Okay,
Huh?
thank you. Oh, do you
Erica,
still
you have
have?
something? Okay, no. So can I proceed to the second question? I think there's still a question we didn't. So thank you again for this question. So is there any approach other than culture appropriation due to the spread of rap music by AAVE? So what we regard this is rap music was basically it was the most the most prominent way of spreading rap music, because they hear rap music does not really intend to no to talk to anyone. It just wants to express themselves. So the most what how do we say this, the most heaviest the heaviest actually sounds the most. So the heaviest way of them speaking av is through their rap music, because they don't really want to accommodate anyone. They just want to accommodate themselves and their expressions. That's why av is rap music is the foremost way of spreading av. However, it is not the only way to attain this. So sometimes people learn it from films, or sometimes just as what was discussed by Igodin in 2013 in one of our studies, actually literature studies that we based this in, is sometimes people also, for example, I go to America in a largely black community. So the people that I interact with, even if I'm not black, is actually just them or me trying to fit in with them. So that's not basically an instance of rap music, but it's something that you grow up in, and that's why you approach the spread, or you get to spread, or you get to share instances of um what else is there on it. So basically, yes, I think you really should be you're really gonna be doing a cultural appropriation if you want to attain av. But as we've said, and as we've said in this discussion, cultural appropriation is not necessarily bad. I think the connotations have been twisted um, due to some misconceptions in the internet. But basically, appropriation is not a bad thing, unless it's like you, as we've said, forcefully threading your way to actually do damage to the culture that you're taking the appreciation from. So sometimes you can also appreciate culture by adapting it. So it's one way of appropriation, but that doesn't mean that it was bad. So thank you for the first question.
Thank you, presenters, and we hope that the presenters were able to answer your question from YouTube. Though. Okay, so we have another question from YouTube. What does child and sus mean in English when they are used by white English speakers?
Erika?
Let me answer that question. Fortunately we encountered a lot of tweets with the same that came from the white English speakers, and they meant that they did not pronounce it like no, it's not like pronounced. They pronounce as Chile, as in a country. That is what a child means, or Chile. Okay, and then it can also mean as a hot pepper, or small or green seed from particular types of pepper plant, or it can be called capsicum or whatever. That's chili, something like that. It can be, yeah, it's really confusing when you see it in Twitter most of the time. But as you can see, researchers, we really tried our best to analyze the context of what they really mean. So sus mean in English when they were used by white English speakers. So as we have mentioned earlier, sus was Success was popularized by a game called Among Us. But if we will dig deeper, we found out that it was sus was used in Great Britain as sus law. So just like what I have mentioned earlier, it is a Vagrancy Act of 1824. So this is to lower the black community, mostly a targeted operation. So sus, I don't know. In Philippine English, it is commonly said, a Filipino said, sus, gan, sus. But then, I don't know how the white English speakers maybe just like how you say Susan, to shorten it, sus, just like that. But it is not really, um, it is not really not that popular until the game called Among Us. I hope, yeah, I answered your question.
Okay, thank you for answering that question. Okay, so we have another question here. So bell hooks, a noteworthy African American scholar and proponent of Black vernacular, emphasizes the importance of AV as a counter-hegemonic speech. So what do you think of this?
So I have actually not heard of bell hooks before, but I have heard of counter hegemonic ideology, let's say. So I agree with bell hooks, even if I don't know him, because I think that I should be counter hegemonics in a sense. Um, Especially because this is a way of for them to reject the dominant culture, which is the whites, right? So they usually do not want the whites to use them, because it's something that they are trying to get back from them. So what we call this is what we call uh, I'm sorry, I forgot the term, but it's some for example, the N word. I will not be able to say it because they're currently on the process of getting it back from the whites, because this N word was used to like um insult them per se. But now they're trying to the African Americans are trying to get back this word from the whites, so they're not allowing the white people to say it now because it's something that they already tried to get back for their culture, and this is something that they don't want the um no very close to reclaim. If my teammates or my group mates know of the word, you can say, because I really just forgot the term. So it is kind of like reclaim. So they're trying to reclaim the words that are being used against them before. So this is actually the ideology of counter hegemonic as well. So they want to reject the idea of the dominant culture for using their what they considered as part of their culture, and that is AV. And that is also what we've repeatedly said to our in our study, that we think that there's a lot of factors that change whether or not a particular instance of using AV is appropriation or not. So if you ask us if AV is necessarily should be a counter hegemonic speech for everyone else, for example, as part of of minorities, we as Asians, me Filipino, and you guys as Indonesians, I think that we don't have to adhere to a counter hegemonic way of using AV. Why? Because basically we're not part of the dominant culture. We're not dominant, we're part of a minority as well. So we kind of count as a minority, and therefore we do not count as a dominant culture in a sense that we're using AV as in our nationalities are counter hegemonic. So yes, I agree that AV is at times should be considered um, counter hegemonic, but not necessarily at all times, especially if used by the minority. And if its single instance of use does not warrant what we've said to be using force, which is hostility, intention, overusage, misconstrued use, and refusal to acknowledge the origin, which is the product of our research. So that's it from my answer. How about my group mates? If you have an answer. Okay.
I would just like to add again to what Kathleen said about minorities not being able to use AV as a counter-hegemonic speech. This is because we essentially have our own counter-hegemonic speech in, I may be overusing this concept, but in Philippine English, because before maybe a few decades back, Philippine English, for example, pronouncing words incorrectly, as was the example earlier, perfect and then perfect, that was considered as Kalabaw English or Carabao English or something that is not supposed to be used in professional settings. However, right now, as there is progress when it comes to linguistics, we are making or we are establishing our own variety that is considered to be correct for us, something that we don't have to conform to the standard American standard British English. So this is what I can give as an example for us Filipinos. And uh, there's another example, Singaporean English, that kind of variety of English was considered to be wrong or not really the standard, but now in Singapore it is more preferred to compared to the standard American English. So maybe that is what we're trying to do right now in the current linguistic era or context. Yes, thank you.
Okay, thank you for that, presenters. And we will now close the open forum. Okay, so we will not be accepting any more questions. Again, I would like to thank the audiences for giving us, good questions for the presenters, and we would also again like to thank the presenters for giving us your time, for sharing us your thesis paper.
Thank you so much.
Okay, now
So
we have reached the end of today's event, but before we officially end our webinar, may I request those who can turn on their cameras to please do so for the photo op. So technical team, please do the honor to capture this moment. Thank you. Okay, please count when you're ready, Mika, to capture. Okay. Mika, can you count when you're ready?
Okay, 1, 2, 3. Okay, another one. 1, 2, 3. Okay.
Okay, thank you, Mika. Once again, we are thankful to our presenters, Kathleen, Sophia, and Erica, for imparting such a wondrous amount of knowledge and delivering such remarkable learnings from their studies. So we are also extending our gratitude to our dear professors from PUP and UNPAM, especially to Ibu Triana, Pak Sepchan, and Pak Aziz. I would also like to express our sincerest gratitude to our attendees who stayed with us in today's webinar. We hope that everyone's knowledge has been grounded, and we also hope that this motivates you to continually discover things and find answers through research. Again, this is the second session of the PUP on PAM thesis webinar. I am Sam, and see you at our next webinar session. Thank you, everyone. Stay safe and scholarly.
Thank you everyone for
Thank
attending.
you. Thank you so much, everyone. Have a great
Thank you
day.
po.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Thank you
birthday.
very much.
Thank you, Pak Abdul.
You're welcome.
Terima kasih.
Sila.
Sama-sama.